God's one and only voice is silence means that God is that which is indivisible. There is no place that God is not. And you can't divide God up and say that God is on this side or God is on that side. I've often said that God isn't doing anything different now than God was doing an hour ago or 100 years ago. And God isn't doing anything different now than he will be doing 1,000 years from now. God is exclusively here and now, not elsewhere, not in heaven someplace apart from us, but here, now, and indivisible. And the word indivisible is very important, because that which is everywhere and cannot be separated or carved up is something that we have a great deal of difficulty in the world of the physical form experiencing and understanding. Because our world, the world of you listening here, is a world of dichotomies. It's a world of paradoxes. We divide everything up. And dichotomies are just our way of being. We divide everything in the world up. The only reason we know that something called darkness exists is because of light. If there was nothing called light, we wouldn't know anything called darkness. The only reason we have a concept called up is because we have something of its reverse called down. You've never seen a person with a front who doesn't have a back. You've never seen a person with an outside who doesn't have an inside. We divide everything. Everything is in the world of the divisible. In the Bhagavad Gita, it speaks about transcending the dichotomies, figuring out a way to get past the up-down, the male-female, the good-bad, the right-wrong, the old, the new, the alive and the dead. Everything has its dichotomy. You can always find its opposites. In fact, that's how the symbolism of language is created, through having opposites. We don't know about oneness in the physical world. Everything has its counterpart, its dichotomy, except for silence. Silence is the only experience that is the same as God. It is indivisible. You take silence, and we'll have some right now, and now let's just cut that in half. And what do we have? More silence. Let's take what we've cut in half and cut it in half again and again. And endlessly you attempt to divide into a dichotomy, silence, but you can never do it, because silence is indivisible. And silence is God's one and only voice. When you go into silence, you go into the place where you make conscious contact with God, whatever it is that God means to you. You make conscious contact with that omnipotent, omniscient force in the world, that omnipresence of God. And the reason I say that it's not crowded along the extra mile is because the mile that most people are on is a very, very noisy mile. And I encourage young people to become more comfortable with silence. We live in a world of bulldozers and leaf blowers and trucks that make endless amounts of noise and chatter. And constantly, I have a home, a place a retreat that I go to frequently on Maui. And oftentimes I will walk in the morning and they're in a big building project in Maui. And I'll go past one building after another and start to count the noisemakers, as all of these machines and all of these people who are trying to make the place look so pristine and so beautiful and so landscaped, instead of just letting it grow, just letting it be. Silence and God are one because you can't divide either one of them. Okay? So that going to silence as frequently as you can, and understanding that out of silence, everything is created. The words that you are listening to right now as I speak emerge from silence. That silence is the source. And it's the source that is what we want to make conscious contact with. Like the source of all light is the sun. And the only reason we know about light is because of something called darkness. But when you go to the source can't be divided. Now, I'm in a 72-year-old body today. I remember being in a 20-year-old body, and in a 30-year-old body, and a 40-year-old body. And you can't find one cell of the body that I was in when I was 20 years old, 50 years ago. There's not one cell left. You go out there and I can't find it. It had all kinds of flowing stuff coming out of my head, and it's like, it's gone. You're not doing anything. You're just being done. That's one of the things that the Tao says, that the Tao is just another term for God. The Tao does nothing. It leaves nothing undone. It leaves nothing undone. Makes the planets stay in alignment, the sun comes out, the oceans are filled, life goes on, fish reproduce themselves, roses show up, and there's nobody out there doing anything. It does nothing. So the question of who we are is can't be answered in physical terms, and it can't be answered with the senses. Your senses will lie to you. They will tell you something, and it's just not true, I mean, our senses even tell us right now that we're sitting still when we're hurling through this ocean, right, at 20 knots. But we're also, so is the whole ocean hurling through space at something like 11 or 12,000 miles an hour. And it's also orbiting around the sun and turning on its axis. So it's turning, orbiting, and hurling all at the same moment. And your senses are saying, I'm just sitting here. You don't see with your eyes. You have to see through your eyes. The part of you that is processing what I'm saying here right now has no form to it, has no beginning, it has no end. There's an infinite part of you. There's an invisible part of you. And until you're comfortable with it and know it and understand that it is the creator, the creation takes place through this creative process within you, called your mind, called your thoughts, called your spirit, called your soul. And one of the things that I have learned is that it's necessary to understand what your soul is to follow your excitement. Now hear this. Your excitement is who you are. Just let that in. We're getting very philosophical. I love it when we get like this, especially when I know we have lots of time, so we can just take it, just... Your excitement is who you are. You're not this body. It's the soul. It's this invisibleness. It's what causes you to feel passion. It's following your excitement. And it's something you can do at any time. And when you do, I guarantee you these two things. It will be effortless, and you will always be supported. It's always an effort when you are not following your excitement. What is it in here? What is that creative spark that just makes you want to do something, or you just feel drawn to do it. And the more you pay attention to this spark, this inner excitement, the more it will support you, and you'll find yourself doing amazing things, like really amazing things. Here's what Patanjali, the great 3rd century BC Indian scholar, great beautiful soul, who was the father of meditation, one who taught me the japa meditation and the I am meditation. He said, when you are inspired, inspired means in spirit. When you are inspired, that means when you are following your excitement. When you are inspired by some great project, some extraordinary project, all of your thoughts break their bonds. Your mind transcends limitations. Your consciousness expands in every direction. And you find yourself in a new and a great and a wonderful world. And then he said, and this is what I mean by being effortless, he said, dormant forces, faculties and talents come alive, and you discover yourself to be a greater person by far than you ever dreamed yourself to be, or I say were ever taught that you could become, because you were not raised to believe in your divinity. You were raised, as Rumi said in that thing I read between the Chinese and the Byzantines, you were raised to believe in your limitations. And you don't know that within you, you have God. You are God. God is not an external concept. It's what the ego has taught us that it is. So that if you can answer the question, who am I? Who am I? And understand that who you are is a divine speck, if you will, a divine fragment of the universal consciousness. The greatest understanding you can have is that you don't understand. And spending your life and your energy and your relationships on trying to always be understood and have someone else agree with you and understand you is one sure way to make sure that you're going to be a victim for the duration of that relationship. You don't have to prove yourself. You don't have to allow yourself to be in a position where someone else is demanding to be understood by you. There's some things that are very simple, some very simple little clues that I use in my own life and in pulling your own strings that I'd like to share here with you. Under the heading of being quietly effective and knowing you're never going to be understood. First is that shrugging is a virtue. If you could just learn the art of the shrug. I like Ayn Rand's title, Atlas Shrugged, Atlas holding up the whole world and just shrugs. And the whole idea of not having to be in a position to defend yourself or to be understood, or somebody's demanding something from you, and when you could just sort of shrug your shoulders and say, well, I don't understand. I just don't understand, and that's okay. My wife and I do this to each other all the time. I mean, she does the craziest things in the world, and vice versa. I mean, she thinks what I do is crazy too. I mean, she believes in what she's doing and believes that that's the way a house has to be run, for example. She makes the beds first thing in the morning. I mean, that to her is just her way. I have lived under the philosophy that it's not any healthier psychologically to get into a made bed than it is to get into an unmade bed. But she makes the bed. I don't understand somebody getting out of bed in the morning and making the bed, but I don't have to understand. It's not necessary for me to understand. I don't have to get into a you're wrong and I'm right attitude toward it. It's just a simple shrug. If you want to make the bed, that's terrific. I'll even help you if you want to. Just let it go. You don't have to. I don't have to understand that. And you know something? Life is full of those little things. Everywhere you go, you're going to encounter people who do things their own way. And that's really what makes the world go round, that uniqueness, that specialness in people. So if you just shrug at it and stop telling yourself that I have to be right, and I have to make somebody else wrong in all of my interactions with them, just shrug.
Just quietly shrug your shoulders and say, they have a right. They're on their own path. They have a right to do what they want to do. And you don't have to be understood. And when you get into that mindset of not needing to be understood all the time, then you're not going to be explaining yourself and having somebody else explain themselves to you over and over again endlessly. Being offended is a choice to be a victim. You ever think how silly it is to go around being offended? There are people who turn on the radio and they hear somebody speaking in a certain tone or saying a word that they don't like, and they have a whole vocabulary of words that they're offended by. And if somebody says one of them, right away they go off into a dither. Well, it's just like letting somebody else's behavior decide how you're going to be emotionally. I mean, you can be the kind of person who goes down the street and your emotions are being pulled by everybody else, your strings are being yanked by everybody else in the street, depending on what words they choose, what symbols come out of their mouth. This person says hell, that one says damn, this one says uh-oh, this one says caca, that one says poo-poo, this one says wee-wee, whatever it may be, and you're offended, or whatever synonyms you want to use for all of those functions. For what? It's like allowing yourself the right to process somebody else's behavior for what it is. It's their behavior. It's not yours. If you don't like what somebody is saying on the radio, tune the dial someplace else. If you don't like the way somebody else is dressing, turn your eyes someplace else. Don't feast your eyes on it. If someone else wants to hear rock music that you think is disgusting, then don't listen to it. That's what this whole thing is about. That's what the First Amendment to the Constitution is about. That's what free speech is about. That's what free expression as a human being is about. That there's no code that is going to fit everyone. And choosing not to be offended is to choose not to be a victim. People speak the way they speak. I don't like some of the language that I see in the films. I don't let my children go and see some of the film. I don't like the violence that is on the screen. Rather than being offended by it and being all upset about it and getting myself worked up and being a victim to the people who choose to display violence on the screens, I simply don't go to those movies. I don't have anything to do with them. And I don't miss them, and I happen to believe that it's part of the gratuitous violence that we find throughout the culture. But I'm doing what I can to eliminate that. But being offended by it, being upset by it, it's as silly as being offended by starvation. Starvation is a part of what the universe is about. And so is my desire to change it and to improve it. That's just as important. And that's what I go with. I go with what I'm for rather than what I'm against. Everything that you're against weakens you. Everything that you're for empowers you. So the question is, do you want to be empowered or do you want to be weakened? Everything you fight, you'll be weaker for the effort. Everything that you're for will empower you. When they asked Mother Teresa if she would march against the war in Vietnam in 1967, she said, no, I won't. She said, but if you have a march for peace, I'll be there.